The crystal halls of the Sara Prime had never felt so cold to High Lady Cirith Valanaris as they did on the morning she learned her fate. She stood before the ruling council of the Velkari Dominion, her bioluminescent skin flickering with pale blue light that betrayed her anger despite her calm face. "You wish me to marry a human?" she asked, her voice steady but sharp. Her father, Lord Consul Valanaris, did not meet her eyes as he spoke. "The human Velkari Defense Pact requires a symbol of unity," he said, his tone suggesting this was already decided, and her opinion meant nothing at all. "They are primitive," Cirith replied. "They live for what? 80 years if they are lucky. 70 to 90, depending on their medical care," her elder brother Kethan added with a smirk that made her want to strike him. The council chambers stretched around them like an ancient cathedral made of living crystal, and the light that filtered through the walls cast rainbow patterns across the floor. Cirith had walked these halls for 300 years, and she had never felt so trapped. "The humans demanded this marriage as proof of our commitment to the Alliance," her father continued. "They are a sentimental species, and they believe such bonds create trust between nations. And you agreed to sacrifice your own daughter for this sentimentality?" "Sacrifice?" Her father finally looked at her, and his expression held something she could not read. "You will outlive him by centuries, Cirith. And when he dies, you will be free to marry again among our own kind. You speak of his death as though it were a minor inconvenience. Is it not?" Cirith had no answer for that, because in truth she had never considered human lives as anything more than brief flickers in the vast darkness of time. The Velkari lived for 1,000 years or more, and they had built an empire that spanned dozens of star systems humans had only discovered faster than light traveled 2 centuries ago. And yet somehow they had become important enough that the Dominion needed their help against the Wraith hegemony. The Wraith were ancient enemies, creatures of shadow and hunger that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. The war against them had lasted longer than human civilization itself, and it showed no signs of ending. "When will I meet this human I am to marry?" Cirith asked, accepting her fate with the grace expected of her station, even as something inside her chest felt like it was being crushed. "He arrives tomorrow," her father said. "His name is Commander Marcus Cole of the United Colonial Fleet, and he is considered a hero among his people." "A hero," Cirith repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. "How wonderful for me." The next day brought rain to the Sara Prime, which the Velkari considered a blessing from the old god. Cirith stood in the reception hall and watched droplets slide down the crystal walls like tears, and she wondered if the universe was mocking her. The human delegation arrived in a shuttle that looked crude and angular compared to the elegant Velkari vessels, and when the doors opened she prepared herself to meet the man who would become her husband. Commander Marcus Cole was not what she expected. Stood a full head shorter than her, with dark hair cut close to his skull and brown eyes that seemed too warm for a warrior. His uniform was simple gray fabric marked with medals she did not recognize, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that surprised her. "High Lady Cirith," he said, bowing his head in a gesture of respect that seemed genuine rather than forced. "Thank you for agreeing to this arrangement. I was not given much choice." "Commander, neither was I," he admitted, and something in his tone made her pause. "But I believe we can make the best of this situation if we try." She studied him more carefully then. This small creature, who would be dead before she reached middle age, his face showed lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter or perhaps worry, and his hands bore calluses that suggested he was no stranger to hard work. "You are younger than I expected," she said. "I am 34 years old," he replied, "which I understand is practically an infant by your standards." Was that humor in his voice? She could not tell, and the uncertainty bothered her more than she wanted to admit. The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later in the Grand Temple of the Sara Prime. thousands of Velkari nobles attended, their bioluminescent skin creating a sea of shifting colors in the darkness of the temple. The human delegation numbered only 50, and they looked small and pale among the towering Velkari. Wore traditional robes of silver and blue, and Marcus wore a formal version of his military uniform with a ceremonial sword at his hip. The high priest spoke words of binding in the ancient Velkari tongue, and Marcus repeated his vows in careful pronunciation that suggested he had practiced for days. When it came time for Cirith to speak her own vows, she found the words catching in her throat. She looked at Marcus and saw him watching her with those warm brown eyes, and there was no judgment in his gaze, no expectation, only patience. She spoke her vows with the detachment of a politician sealing a trade agreement, and if Marcus noticed the coldness in her voice, he gave no sign of it. That night, they were escorted to the quarters they would share as husband and wife. The rooms were beautiful, filled with Velkari art and human comforts that someone had thoughtfully provided. But they felt like a gilded cage to Cirith, expected Marcus to retire immediately or perhaps to make demands of her as a new husband might. Instead, he sat in a chair by the window and looked out at the crystal towers of the city. "Tell me about your home," he said. "You are looking at it?" "No. I mean, tell me about it," he insisted gently. "What do you love about this place? What are your favorite memories? What do you dream about when you think of the future?" Cirith stared at him as though he had spoken in a language she did not understand. "Why do you ask such questions?" "Because you are my wife now, and I would like to know you. You will be dead in decades," she said, and the words came out harsher than she intended. What could any of this possibly matter? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was soft but steady. "Perhaps nothing matters in the grand scheme of things," he admitted. "Perhaps my entire life is just a brief flicker compared to yours. But that does not mean I want to spend it as strangers with the woman I married." He stood and moved toward the bedroom, pausing at the door. "I will not force anything upon you, Cirith, and I will not pretend this situation is ideal for either of us. But I hope someday you might see me as more than just a political inconvenience." He disappeared into the bedroom, and Cirith remained by the window for a long time after, watching the rain and wondering why his words had affected her so deeply. 3 months passed, and Cirith found herself confused by her human husband in ways she had not anticipated. He asked her questions constantly, learning about Velkari history and culture and art with genuine curiosity. He brought her small gifts, flowers from the palace gardens or interesting stones he found during his walks. He never demanded anything from her, never complained about her coldness, never stopped treating her with kindness even when she did not return it. She did not understand him at all. Then the war returned. The Wraith hegemony launched a massive offensive against 3 Velkari colony worlds, shattering the fragile peace that the Alliance had been meant to protect. Cirith learned of it during breakfast, when a messenger burst into their quarters with urgent news for Commander Cole. She watched Marcus read the report, watched his jaw tighten and his eyes grow hard, and she saw something in him she had not seen before. "I am volunteering for frontline deployment," he announced. "What?" Cirith rose from her seat, surprising herself with the sharpness of her reaction. "You cannot simply leave. My soldiers are being sent to defend Kalen's fall," he said, already moving toward his military equipment. "I will not let them fight and die without me. The treaty requires you to remain here as a symbol of the Alliance." Marcus paused and looked at her, and for the first time she saw fire in those warm brown eyes. "My people are dying, Cirith," he said quietly, "and I will not hide behind politics while they bleed." He left that evening on a military transport, and Cirith stood at the window of their quarters and watched his ship disappear into the stars. She told herself the strange ache in her chest was merely concern for the political implications of his departure. She told herself she did not care what happened. To him, she told herself many things at night, but none of them felt true. The orbital command station above Kalen's Fall hummed with tension as Cirrus stepped off the transport shuttle. She had pulled every political string she possessed to secure a position here, telling her family it was to protect their investment in the human alliance. They did not need to know the real reason she had come. Station was a massive ring of metal and crystal that circled the besieged planet below, and from its observation decks, she could see the smoke rising from a dozen burning cities. The Wraith had come in force, their shadow ships blotting out the stars as they descended upon the colony world. High Lady Valanaris, a Valkyrie admiral, greeted her with a bow that was more surprised than respectful. "We did not expect someone of your status to join us here. The council wished for a representative to observe the joint operations," she lied smoothly. "And I volunteered." The admiral accepted this explanation without question and assigned her quarters. Befitting her rank, Sarith did not care about the quarters. She cared about the tactical displays that showed every unit on the planet below, including a small blinking marker labeled Human 47th Infantry Regiment, commanded by one Marcus Cole. The first week was agony. She watched the tactical feeds constantly, tracking the movements of human and Valkyrie forces as they struggled to hold back the Wraith advance. The enemy was relentless. Waves of twisted creatures that seemed to feel no pain and knew no fear. And they pushed deeper into the colony with every passing day. The Valkyrie commanders treated the situation with their usual patience, speaking of acceptable losses and strategic withdrawals, as though the lives being spent were merely numbers on a screen. "The human forces are holding the eastern sector," one admiral noted during a briefing. "They are taking heavy casualties, but they continue to fight." "Mayflies," another officer muttered, using the Valkyrie slang for humans. "Brief lives, brief flames, but useful for holding positions we would rather not waste our own soldiers defending." Cirith felt something twist in her chest at those words, but she kept her face neutral. That night she sat alone in her quarters and watched Marcus's unit designation blink on her personal display. The 47th Infantry had been engaged in combat for 6 straight days without relief, and their casualty reports made her stomach turn. She told herself she was merely protecting a political asset. She told herself the marriage must survive for the treaty to hold. She told herself many lies. But when she finally slept, she dreamed of warm brown eyes and a voice asking her about her favorite memories on the 8th day. The Wraith broke through the eastern defensive line. Cirith was in the command center when the alarms began to wail, and she watched in horror as enemy forces poured through a gap in the human defenses. "The 47th Infantry is cut off," a tactical officer announced. "They are surrounded with no route of retreat. Write them off," Admiral Velthresh ordered without emotion. "Redirect reinforcements to the secondary line." "No." Cirith spoke before she could stop herself, and every officer in the room turned to stare at her. "High Lady?" She forced herself to remain calm, to speak with the authority of her station rather than the desperation she felt. "Commander Cole is my husband," she said. "His death would damage the Alliance at a critical moment, and I strongly suggest we attempt a rescue." The Admiral considered this for a long moment before shaking his head. "The tactical situation does not support such an operation," he said. "I am sorry, High Lady, but the humans will have to save themselves." Cirith wanted to scream, wanted to grab the Admiral by his glowing throat and demand he send help. But she knew it would accomplish nothing. Instead, she turned to the tactical display and watched what she saw over the next 11 hours changed everything she thought she knew about. Humans Marcus Cole and his soldiers did not surrender. They did not break. They did not run cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Surrounded by an enemy that outnumbered them 10 to 1, The humans of the 47th Infantry dug into their positions and refused to die. Cyrith watched the sensor feeds with growing disbelief as Marcus reorganized scattered units into a cohesive defense. She saw him personally drag wounded soldiers to cover while enemy fire scorched the ground around him. She heard fragments of his radio communications, his voice calm and steady, even as chaos erupted everywhere. "Hold the line," he told his soldiers again and again. "Help is coming. Just hold the line." There was no help coming. He must have known that. But he said it anyway, and somehow his soldiers believed him. The Valkyrie officers began to gather around the tactical displays, their usual detachment giving way to something that looked almost like fascination. "They should have broken hours ago," one general murmured. "No force can sustain this level of combat for so long. Humans do not follow our tactical models," another officer observed. "They fight as though every minute matters." "Because to them it does," Syrah said quietly, understanding something for the first time. "They do not have centuries to wait for better circumstances. They only have now. Hour after hour the battle raged. And hour after hour the humans held. Marcus seemed to be everywhere at once, appearing on different sensor feeds as he moved from position to position. He shared water with his soldiers when supplies ran low. He helped dig trenches with his own hands. He carried ammunition to gun emplacements while enemy snipers tried to kill him when one position was about to be overrun. He led a countercharge personally, driving back the Wraith with nothing but rifles and human fury. "He is wounded," someone announced, and Sirith's heart clenched in her chest. The medical sensors showed Marcus had taken a hit to his left arm. But he did not stop. An hour later, he took another wound to his side. And still he did not stop. Why does he not seek medical attention? A Valkyrie mech asked in confusion. "Because his soldiers need him more," Sirith answered, and her voice was barely a whisper. Finally, after 11 hours of impossible resistance, relief forces broke through the Wraith lines. A Valkyrie armored column had pushed forward on its own initiative, its commander later admitting he had been watching the human defense and could not stand by while such warriors died. When the link-up was complete, Marcus Cole was still standing barely. He had not slept in 2 days. He had 3 separate wounds that should have sent him to a hospital. He was already planning the counterattack. Sith watched the video feed as Marcus greeted the Valkyrie relief commander, and she saw the alien officer bow deeply to the human in a gesture of respect that was almost never given to outsiders. "Your soldiers fought with honor," the Valkyrie said. "My soldiers fought for each other." Marcus replied, "Honor had nothing to do with it." That night, Sirith submitted a formal request for transfer to the surface. Her family was appalled. The Admiralty was confused. She did not care about any of it. She had spent her entire life looking down on humans as lesser beings, brief creatures whose short lives made them insignificant in the grand sweep of history. But she had just watched a man hold an impossible position through nothing but sheer will and love for his soldiers. She had watched him bleed for people he could have abandoned. She had watched him fight like a star burning against the darkness, and she needed to understand why when her shuttle descended through the smoke-filled atmosphere of Callan's Fall, Sirith felt something she had not experienced in centuries: fear. Yes, but also something else, something that might have been hope. Forward Operating Base Talon was nothing like the elegant command station in orbit. It was mud and metal and the smell of smoke. A desperate collection of bunkers and trenches carved into the scarred earth of Callan's Fall. Sirith stepped off the transport shuttle and immediately sank ankle-deep into brown sludge that ruined her expensive boots. She did not care across the compound. She could see human soldiers moving with purpose, carrying supplies and weapons and wounded comrades on stretchers. They looked exhausted. All of them. But none of them stopped working. A young human officer approached her with wide eyes, clearly shocked to see a Valkyrie noble standing in the middle of their base. "Hi, Lady Valanaris," he stammered. "We were not expecting anyone of your rank. Is there some kind of inspection?" "I'm looking for my husband," she said simply. The officer led her through the base. And with every step, Cirith saw things that challenged everything she knew about warfare. Valari camps were orderly and clean, with strict hierarchies and protocols that had been refined over millennia. This place was chaos. Soldiers slept wherever they could find space, their weapons never more than an arm's reach away. Officers ate the same food as enlisted personnel, sharing rations that looked barely edible. Medical tents overflowed with wounded, and the screams of the dying mixed with the laughter of those still alive. It was horrible and beautiful, and utterly confusing. She found Marcus outside the command bunker, helping unload supplies from a vehicle that had just arrived from the rear lines. He was lifting heavy crates alongside his soldiers, his wounded arm wrapped in dirty bandages, sweat dripping down his face. When he saw her, he nearly dropped the crate he was carrying. "Cirith?" He set down the supplies and walked toward her, his expression a mixture of shock and concern. "What are you doing here? This is a war zone." "I noticed. You should be safe on the station. Why would you come down here?" She did not have a good answer for that question, so she simply said the first thing that came to mind. "I wanted to understand." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly as though her words made some kind of sense to him, even if they did not make sense to her. "Come with me," he said. Over the next several days, Cirith experienced human warfare in a way no Valkyrie noble ever had. She watched morph through the camp, stopping to talk with every soldier he passed. He knew their names, all of them, and not just their names, but their stories. Private Chun had a daughter back on Earth who was about to start school. Sergeant Williams was getting married after the war to a woman he had known since childhood. Corporal Okonkwo had left his family's farm to enlist because he believed in protecting people who could not protect themselves. "Why do you learn all of this?" Cirith asked Marcus one evening as they shared a meal in his cramped quarters. "Because if I am going to ask them to die for me, I should at least know who they are. Does that not make it harder when they fall in battle?" Marcus looked at her with those warm brown eyes that she had once dismissed as unremarkable. "That is exactly the point," he said. "It should be hard. It should hurt. Because the moment we stop feeling the loss of our soldiers is the moment we stop valuing their lives." Cirith thought about the Valkyrie generals she had known, the ones who spoke of acceptable casualties without a flicker of emotion. She thought about how easy it was to sacrifice soldiers when you did not know their names. "Your people think differently than mine," she admitted. "We do not have the luxury of thinking any other way," Marcus replied. "When you only have a few decades to live, every relationship matters, every moment counts. Every life is precious because there are so few of them." A few days later, Marcus invited her to accompany him on a reconnaissance mission. The Valkyrie officers at the base strongly objected, arguing that a person of her status should not be exposed to direct combat. Marcus let her make her own choice. She chose to go. Patrol took them through territory that had been fought over multiple times, a landscape of craters and burned forests and the wreckage of vehicles from both sides. Marcus moved carefully, checking his equipment and watching the tree line with constant vigilance. "Stay close to me," he said. "And if shooting starts, get behind cover immediately." Cirith had never felt so vulnerable in her entire 300 years of life on the Sara Prime. She was protected by guards and protocol and the weight of her family name. Here, she was just another body that could be killed by a stray shot or an enemy ambush. The attack came without warning. Wraith warriors erupted from the ground itself, their shadow forms solidifying into claws and teeth, and Hunger Marcus reacted instantly, pushing Cirith behind a fallen tree. While he opened fire on the nearest enemy, the next few minutes were a blur of noise and violence that Cirith would remember for the rest of her long life. She saw human soldiers fighting with desperate ferocity, using everything from rifles to knives to their bare hands. She saw Marcus kill 3 Wraith in close combat. His movements efficient and brutal. She saw a young private die just meters away from her. His last words, a whispered name that might have been his mother or his lover, and a Wraith claw caught her across the back. And pain like nothing she had ever experienced drove her to the ground. Cirith. Marcus was at her side in an instant, his rifle roaring as he drove back the creature that had wounded her. Through a haze of agony, she felt him lift her, felt his arms wrap around her body, felt him start to run. "Leave me," she managed to say. "I am too heavy. You will not make it." "Shut up," Marcus replied. And there was iron in his voice that brooked no argument. He carried her 2 kilometers through enemy territory, 2 kilometers of running, and dodging and killing anything that got in his way. 2 kilometers. With wounds of his own bleeding through his uniform. 2 kilometers. That should have been impossible when they finally reached the safety of friendly lines. Marcus collapsed beside her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You should have left me," Cirith said again. Her voice weak from blood loss. Marcus looked at her, and even through his exhaustion she could see the fire in his eyes. "You are my wife," he said, as though that explained everything, and perhaps it did during her recovery in the medical tent. Cirith had time to think about what she had witnessed. She had seen Velkhari warfare, the careful movements of forces measured over years and decades, the acceptance of losses as a necessary cost of victory, and she had seen human warfare, the desperate struggle of creatures who knew they did not have years to spare, who fought like every battle might be their last because, for many of them, it was the humans did not love less. Because their lives were short, they loved more, they burned brighter. Because they knew the flame would not last when she was strong enough to walk again. Cirith found Marcus in the command bunker, poring over tactical maps with his officers. He looked up when she entered, and his face showed relief that made something warm bloom in her chest. "You should be resting," he said. "I have rested enough." She walked to his side and looked at the maps, at the enemy positions and the thin line of human and Velkhari forces holding them back. "Intelligence reports indicate a massive Wraith assault is coming," Marcus said quietly. "They are massing everything they have for one final push. Can we hold?" Marcus was silent for a long moment. "The Velkhari High Command has ordered evacuation of all essential personnel," he finally said. "They want to save what they can before the planet falls. And you?" He turned to face her, and she saw something in his expression that she had not seen before, a sadness that went deeper than wounds or exhaustion. "I will not leave my soldiers behind," he said. "If they stay and fight, I stay and fight." Cirith reached out and took his hand, feeling the rough calluses against her smooth skin. "Then I will stay as well." Marcus stared at her as though he could not believe what he was hearing. "Cirith, you do not have to do this. Your family will never forgive you if you die here." "My family has never understood me," she replied. "But I think perhaps you do." She squeezed his hand and felt him squeeze back. "We will face the storm together," she said. "And if we fall, at least we will fall as one." For the first time since their wedding, Marcus smiled at her with genuine warmth, and for the first time since their wedding, Cirith smiled back. The evacuation shuttles departed at dawn, carrying Velkhari dignitaries and essential personnel to the safety of the orbital station. Cirith watched them go from the edge of forward operating base Talon, her family's furious messages still burning in her personal communicator. They had threatened to disown her. They had called her a fool and a disgrace. She had turned off the device and thrown it into the mud. "You could still leave," Marcus said, standing beside her as the last shuttle disappeared into the smoke-filled sky. "No one would blame you. I would blame myself." He nodded slowly, accepting her answer without argument around them. The base was preparing for the battle that everyone knew was coming. Human soldiers checked their weapons and wrote final letters to loved ones they might never see again. Valkyrie warriors, those who had chosen to stay despite orders to evacuate, moved among the humans with a new respect in their eyes. They had watched the humans fight for weeks now, and something had changed in them. How many stayed? Cirith asked. 300 Valkyrie volunteers, Marcus replied, plus 1,800 humans from various units that refused evacuation orders. Against how many Wraith? Intelligence estimates at least 50,000. Cirith felt her stomach drop, but she kept her face calm. Those are not good odds. No, Marcus agreed. But we have something they do not have. What is that? Each other. The Wraith assault began at midnight. They came like a tide of darkness. Wave after wave of shadow creatures that seemed to absorb the light itself. The first line of defenses fell within an hour. Exactly as Marcus had predicted, he had planned for this, pulling his forces back in an orderly retreat. That made the Wraith pay for every meter of ground. Cirith stood in the command bunker and watched the battle unfold on tactical displays that flickered with interference from the enemies. Presence Marcus was everywhere, his voice crackling over the communication channels as he directed the defense. 3rd Platoon fall back to position Delta. 4th Platoon cover their retreat. Artillery target Sector 7. Fire for effect. Medics to the northern bunker. We have wounded who need extraction. He never stopped moving, never stopped thinking. Never stopped fighting. The Valkyrie officers who had stayed behind watched him with something like awe. "I have commanded armies for 400 years, General Velkorath said quietly to Cirith. "I have never seen anyone lead like this." "What do you mean?" "He treats every soldier as though they matter," the general replied. "He does not calculate acceptable losses. He fights to save every single life he can. And somehow that makes his soldiers fight harder than any I have ever seen." As if to prove the general's point, a report came in that the eastern bunker was about to be overrun. The tactical situation was clear. The position was lost, and the soldiers there should retreat while they still could. Instead, Marcus grabbed a rifle and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Cirith demanded. "Those are my people," he said, simply. "Marcus, you cannot save everyone." He paused at the doorway and looked back at her, and she saw the fire in his eyes burning brighter than ever. "I can try." He led a counterattack personally, charging into the enemy with a handful of volunteers at his side. Cirith watched on the tactical display as his marker moved into the heart of the fighting, watched as casualty reports poured in from the soldiers around him, watched as one by one his volunteers fell, but Marcus kept going. He reached the eastern bunker and rallied the defenders, organizing them into a fighting force that somehow pushed the Wraith back. He took a wound to his leg, but kept standing. Took a wound to his chest, but kept fighting. He took a wound that should have killed him, but refused to die. "Velthorin," General Velkorath whispered, using the ancient Valkyrie word for the death glory of warriors who transcended their mortal limits. But Marcus did not die. He held the position until reinforcements arrived. Human and Valkyrie soldiers who had seen his stand on the tactical feeds and refused to let him fall alone when the Wraith finally retreated from the eastern sector. They left behind a field of their own dead that outnumbered the defenders 10-1. The battle raged for 3 more hours. Marcus continued to lead from the front, appearing at every position that was about to break, inspiring soldiers who should have given up hours ago to keep fighting. Cirith could not look away from the tactical displays, could not stop watching her husband burn like a star against the darkness. Why does he do this? She asked the General Velkarth. Why does he risk so much for soldiers he will never see again after this war ends? The old general was quiet for a long moment before answering. I asked him the same question yesterday, he admitted. And do you know what he told me? What? He said that the measure of a leader is not how many battles they win, but how many of their people they bring home. And that every soldier who dies under his command is a personal failure that he carries with him forever. Cirith felt tears forming in her eyes. A physical reaction she had not experienced in over a century. That must be an unbearable weight. Yes, the general agreed. And he carries it anyway, because he believes his soldiers deserve a commander who feels the cost of war rather than one who calculates it. The final Wraith assault came just before dawn. They threw everything they had at the human and Velkari lines. A desperate attempt to overwhelm the defenders through sheer numbers for one terrible hour. It seemed like they would succeed position after position fell. And the survivors fell back toward the command bunker, where Cirith waited with the last reserves. Marcus was among them. His uniform soaked with blood from wounds she could not count. His face pale from exhaustion and blood loss. This is it, he said, his voice hoarse but steady. Either we hold here or we die here. Cirith moved to his side and picked up a rifle from a fallen soldier. Then show me how to fight like a human. Marcus looked at her with surprise that melted into something warmer. Something that might have been pride. Stay close to me, he said. And do not stop shooting until they stop coming. The Wraith hit them with everything they had left. Cirith fired until her weapon overheated. Then grabbed another and kept firing. She saw soldiers fall around her, human and Velkari alike. And she felt each loss like a physical blow. But she also saw them fight. Saw them stand back to back and face the darkness together. Saw humans and Velkari die protecting each other as though the differences between their species meant nothing, and in the center of it all was Marcus. Fighting like a man possessed, refusing to fall no matter how many wounds he took. When the Wraith finally broke through the last line of defense, Marcus met them with a roar of defiance that echoed across the battlefield. He charged into the enemy alone, buying precious seconds for the soldiers behind him to reorganize. Cirith tried to follow him, but General Velkarth held her back. Look, the old general said, pointing toward the sky through the smoke and fire. Cirith saw lights descending from orbit, dozens of them, 100 ships bearing the markings of the Velkari fleet. The same fleet that had been ordered to withdraw and abandon the planet. They came back. She whispered. The relief force hit the Wraith like a hammer. Dropships deployed fresh troops directly into the battle. And orbital strikes turned the enemy's rear formations into ash within an hour. The Wraith assault had become a Wraith rout. And the shadow creatures fled into the forest to escape the sudden reversal. Cirith pushed through the chaos of the battlefield. Searching desperately for Marcus, she found him lying in a crater, surrounded by the bodies of the Wraith he had killed in his final stand. He was still breathing. Barely, his eyes fluttering open when she knelt beside him. Cirith, he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. I am here, she said, tears streaming down her face. I am here. You impossible, stubborn, wonderful man. She took his hand and felt how cold his skin had become. I love you, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. I love you, Marcus. Do you hear me? His eyes focused on her face, and despite everything, despite the wounds and the exhaustion and the nearness of death, he smiled. About time, he whispered. Then his eyes closed and his hand went limp in hers. Cirith screamed for medics, screamed for help, screamed until her voice gave out, and somewhere in the chaos of the battlefield, someone heard. 6 months after the Battle of Kallan's fall, the rebuilt colonial capital hosted a ceremony that would be remembered for generations. Cirith stood at the window of the medical center and watched workers erect a stage in the central plaza, preparing for the event that would honor the heroes of the battle behind her. in a bed that had been his home for far too long. Marcus Cole was finally awake. "You should be resting," she said without turning around. "I have been resting for 6 months," Marcus replied, his voice still weak but growing stronger every day. "I think I have earned the right to sit up and complain." Sirith turned and saw him struggling to push himself upright. She moved to help him, adjusting pillows and checking the monitors that tracked his vital signs. The doctors had said his survival was a miracle, that no human should have been able to withstand the wounds he had suffered, that his heart had stopped 3 times during surgery, and each time he had somehow come back. Sirith did not believe in miracles, but she was starting to believe in Marcus Cole. "The ceremony is tomorrow," she said. "They want you to speak, I know. Are you strong enough?" Marcus looked at her with those warm brown eyes. The same eyes that had confused her when they first met. The same eyes that had burned with fire during the battle. The same eyes that she now realized she could not imagine living without. "I will be strong enough," he said. "I have to be." "Why?" "Because the soldiers who died deserve to be remembered by someone who knew them, not just honored by politicians who never learned their names." Sirith took his hand and held it gently, careful of the bandages that still covered his healing wounds. "You are a remarkable man." "Marcus Cole, I am just a man," he replied. "Nothing more and nothing less." "That is exactly what makes you remarkable." The ceremony the next day drew crowds that filled the plaza and spilled into the surrounding streets. Humans and Valkyrie stood together, their differences forgotten in the shared memory of a battle that had changed everything. When Marcus walked onto the stage, supported by Sirith on one side and General Velkorath on the other, the crowd fell silent. He was still pale and thin from his long recovery, still visibly bearing the scars of wounds that would never fully heal. But he stood straight and looked out at the thousands of faces watching him. "I am not going to talk about victory," he began, his voice amplified across the plaza. "I am not going to talk about glory or honor or the strategic importance of what we accomplished here." He paused, and Sirith saw him take a deep breath. "I'm going to talk about the people we lost for the next hour." Marcus spoke about his soldiers. He told stories about Private Chun, who had dreamed of seeing his daughter grow up. He spoke of Sergeant Williams, who had been only weeks away from his wedding. He remembered Corporal Okonkwo, who had left everything behind because he believed in protecting the innocent. He named them all, every human and every Valkyrie who had fallen in the battle. And for each one, he shared something personal, something that made them more than just a name on a memorial by the time he finished. There was not a dry eye in the plaza. Even General Velkorath, who had lived for 5 centuries and witnessed more deaths than he could count, wiped tears from his glowing cheeks. "These are the true heroes," Marcus concluded. "Not me, not any commander or general or politician, but the soldiers who gave their lives so that others might live. And I will carry their names with me until the day I join them." He stepped back from the podium, and the crowd erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very earth. Later that evening, after the ceremony had ended and the crowds had dispersed, Sirith found Marcus standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting over Callan's Fall, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. And for a moment, the wounded world looked almost peaceful. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," he admitted honestly. "I do not think I will ever be all right, not completely. Not after everything we lost." Sirith moved to stand beside him, her shoulder touching his. "Then we will be not all right together." Marcus turned to look at her, and she saw the grief in his eyes, but also something else, something that looked like hope. "Why did you stay?" he asked. "On Callan's Fall, when you could have left, why did you stay with me?" Sirith considered the question carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer. "Because I finally understood what you were trying to teach me all along," she said. that the length of a life matters less than how it is lived, that loving deeply for a short time is worth more than loving cautiously forever, that some things are worth dying for and some people are worth dying with. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the stubble on his jaw and the warmth of his skin. I was taught that loving a human was foolish, she continued, that I would only suffer when you died. But I have learned that the suffering is part of the love, that you cannot have one without the other, and that the joy of knowing you is worth any pain that comes after. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and kissed her. It was their first real kiss. Not the formal gesture at their wedding, but something true and tender and filled with all the words they had never said when they finally separated. Cirith felt tears running down her cheeks. I love you, Marcus said. I have loved you since the moment I asked about your dreams, and you looked at me like I was insane. You are insane, Cirith replied with a laugh that was half sob. You still are. And somehow that is what I love most about you. The years that followed the Battle of Callan's Fall were years of change for both the human and Valkyrie peoples. The war against the Wraith continued. But something fundamental had shifted. In how it was fought, Valkyrie commanders began to question the doctrine of acceptable losses that had guided their strategy for millennia. They watched recordings of the battle and studied how Marcus had led, how he had valued every life and fought to save every soldier. They listened to stories from the Valkyrie warriors who had fought alongside humans and heard about the fierce loyalty that human soldiers showed to leaders who earned their respects. Slowly, carefully, the Valkyrie began to change. Young officers requested joint training with human units. Academies began teaching courses on human military philosophy. Word mayfly disappeared from common usage, replaced by a new term of respect that roughly translated to those who burn bright. Marcus was awarded the highest honors both species could bestow, but he accepted them quietly and without fanfare when asked about his heroism. He always turned the conversation to the soldiers who had served under him, the ones who had survived and the ones who had not, never stopped carrying their Namasirith watched her husband navigate fame and recognition with the same quiet dignity he had shown in battle. She watched him mentor young officers, both human and Valkyrie, teaching them that leadership was not about strategy, but about people. She watched him grow older, his hair turning gray and his steps slowing with each passing year, and she loved him more with each day they shared. Years later, when historians analyzed the turning point in the Wraith War, they pointed to strategic innovations and tactical breakthroughs and the alliance between humans and Valkyrie. But those who had been there knew the truth. The turning point was a single man standing against the darkness, a man who fought not for glory or territory, but for the soldiers beside him, a man who showed an ancient civilization that there was another way to value life. Marcus Cole lived for another 62 years after the Battle of Callan's Fall. He and Cirith traveled together, taught together, and loved together for every one of those years. When he finally passed, surrounded by family and friends from both species, Cirith held his hand and told him she would see him again someday. She did not know if that was true, but it felt right to say by Valkyrie standards. 62 years was the blink of an eye, a tiny fraction of Cirith's long life. But in those 62 years, Marcus had changed everything. He had changed the war, he had changed the Valkyrie, had changed Cirith herself in ways she was still discovering, and that, she realized, was the true lesson of loving a human. They burned like stars, brief and brilliant and impossible to ignore, and even after their light faded, the warmth remained. Cirith never remarried. She spent the remaining centuries of her life teaching others about the man she had loved, sharing his stories and his wisdom with generations of students who had never met him. And when people asked her if she regretted marrying a creature with such a short lifespan, she always gave the same answer. I was given a choice between a long life of safety and a short life of meaning, she would say. And Marcus taught me that meaning is always worth the cost. She would smile then, remembering warm brown eyes and calloused hands and a voice that asked about her dreams. Besides, she would add, the candle that burns twice as bright may burn half as long, but it lights the darkness for everyone around it. And what greater gift could any life offer than that?